So I'm really interested in how this project got started. How does a lawyer produce a documentary of this caliber?
Well, like a lot of things in life, it just kind of fell into my lap. I went to Sewanee, so I'd always known the story about this team. I have a good friend from Sewanee, David Cruz, who's not a full-time filmmaker either, but he had done a documentary on Governor William Winter of Mississippi. So we were talking one night. I said, David, for your next documentary, why don't you do one on this 1899 team? And he said, hey, that's a great idea. You help me. Well, I thought he meant he was going to do it and I was going to kind of watch and learn. And it didn't take long to get sucked into the whole project. And 5 years later, we had a film.
But this is something that, I mean, you went to Sewanee and you'd heard sort of the story of this team. I mean, is this kind of like common knowledge if you go to Sewanee about that 1899 team?
Yeah, I think probably within the first 24 hours of being on campus, you hear about it because it's something that everybody knows about. There's a stained glass window in the chapel in the center of campus with a stained glass of the 1899 team. There's a plaque at the field, and you just hear people talk about it all the time. So it's something that's really part of the DNA of Sewanee.
For those that don't know much about Sewanee, what are the 4 or 5 things that pedigree things we need to know about Sewanee?
Sure, it's a small liberal arts college in Sewanee, Tennessee, which is between Chattanooga and Nashville. It's up on top of a mountain. It's very isolated in one sense, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's got Victorian Gothic architecture. Now there are about 1,700 students, and it's got per capita more Rhodes Scholars than almost any college in the country, so it's very well respected.
And there's a pride about going to Sewanee. I mean, it's a big deal. It obviously used to be University of the South, but I mean, I feel like there's a sort of a fraternity, if you will, of people that have gone to Sewanee and been a part of that institution.
There is, and I think a lot of that has to do with the location and the remoteness because you're not in a big city, you don't have all these other things to do, so what happens is you find ways to make your own fun, and you also spend a lot of time with your classmates. So you develop these incredible friendships.
So you're a little bit cloistered in there. I remember I went to campus one time. This would have been like the winter of 2010, and snow was on the ground, and I just remember there was a place called the Monteagle Inn that was like right there close to it.
Right.
Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, Monteagle's about 5 miles outside of Sewanee, and it's a marvelous community in itself. It started out as a summer community, and lots of families from Memphis and Nashville and other places, that's where they spend their summers. So it's a unique place.
All right, so the people that don't know about this team, what's the big deal about the 1899 Sewanee team?
The big deal is that in 1899, football was just getting started in the South. At that time, because the southern schools were so far apart, you only played 3 or 4 games a year because it was so expensive to travel. And in 1899, Sewanee did something unprecedented. They played 12 games, which for a southern school was unheard of. In the north, where football started, that was common, but in the South, it just had never happened before. And Sewanee was the first team in the country to travel long distances in 1899. The reason that they're unique is not only did they play 12 games and win all 12, but they traveled 2,500 miles on a train and played 5 games in 6 days. So they played Texas and Austin on Thursday, Texas A&M and Houston on Friday, Tulane and New Orleans on Saturday. They took Sunday off. They played LSU in Baton Rouge on Monday and Ole Miss in Memphis on Tuesday. So an incredible feat that'll never happen again.
And who was sort of the linchpin of all this? I mean, my understanding was that like there was a big rivalry between Vandy and Sewanee, and they couldn't quite work that out, and then they had to kind of go with this road trip that was a replacement for that game.
Yes, part of the unique aspect of this story is that at that time there were no athletic departments, no athletic trainers, no athletic directors. It was all run by students. So football was handled completely by students. So there was a student in 1899 called Luke Lee. He was 20 years old. He was from Nashville, and he hired the football coach. He recruited players. He did the scheduling. He handled the equipment, all aspects of this. And as a 20-year-old student, he had a vision for the team. And at that time, the biggest game in the South was Sewanee and Vanderbilt on Thanksgiving Day. And usually on that one game, Sewanee made enough money to pay for the rest of the season. Well, for some reason in 1899, probably to do with finances and gate receipts, Lee couldn't come to an agreement with Vanderbilt. So he had to figure out a way to pay for the season, and the way he figured that out was to do this road trip.
Mm-hmm. I mean, part of it, there's part of me that thinks like, wow, what a genius thing to do, and the logistics of the whole trip. I mean, that was something in and of itself. But then there's this other part of me that thinks this guy was absolutely crazy. You know, I mean, are we sort of tottering between those two things?
Absolutely. He must have been very charismatic. He must have been quite a figure even at 20 years old. Just to give you an example, he later became the youngest U.S. Senator at that time ever for the state of Tennessee. He founded the Nashville Tennessean newspaper. And probably my favorite story was he fought in World War I. At the end of the war, he had the vision to see that the German people, if they were saddled with all these reparations, it was going to lead to further trouble down the road. So he got a group of soldiers without telling his superiors, and they went to Holland to a castle where Kaiser Wilhelm II was had gone and was in hiding. They were going to go to the castle and kidnap the Kaiser and bring him to the Paris peace treaty talks. So that's the kind of person we're dealing with. This schedule is a perfect example. It was crazy to ask these players to play 5 games in 6 days, but he wasn't on the field doing it. So he orchestrated it, but he didn't have to go through the pain of playing.
Well, and obviously the guy had enough self-confidence to see the thing through. I mean, you know, one of the great stories that I remember just that they lost the cleats. You know, I mean, they misplaced the cleats on the way there, and he had the wherewithal to get all the equipment there.
Yeah, they went down the mountain to Cowan and left Cowan train station to go to Texas. And after they got on the train to Texas, he figured out that they had left the cleats in the Cowan. So think about this. This is not an era of cell phones. This was an era of telegraph. He telegraphed back to Cowan, said put him on the next train. Then he got the train schedules, and he found out where the train was going and where it would end in Nashville. He then telegraphed a classmate in Nashville and said, the train's going to arrive on this, pick them up and put them on this train. And so through train schedules and telegraph, he orchestrated this whole thing, and the cleats arrived on time.
Let's talk about some of the other players on the team. Who was the coach of the team?
Coach of the team was named Herman Milton Billy Suter. He had come from Princeton. He was a young man. He was probably in his mid-20s, so he wasn't much older than the players. He had played football in Princeton and in the Northeast, so he had a lot of ideas that he brought to the South, one of which was the quick kick, which had never been used in the South before, and you were not allowed to scout teams back then. So when Sewanee went to play, the other team didn't know about this quick kick, and they would frequently use that.
What was interesting to me was that the coach couldn't coach. The coach had to sit in the stands. And while the game was going on, the coach couldn't coach the players. And so Suter kind of had to sit back a little bit, not coach the team.
That's right. They had to be ready to play, and at that time, players played both ways. If you came out of the game, you couldn't go back in, so you stayed in unless you were really hurt or crippled. And there were only 3 downs to make 5 yards. There was no forward passing back then. So they had numbered codes. There were no huddles. So the team would run a play. As soon as that play was over, they would line up and run the next one. So the defense had to be ready to go, and they would just use numbered codes. So it was a very fast-paced game.
I remember them saying that they ran like 13 plays in a minute. I mean, that's like a play every 5 seconds. I mean, that is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, to get the stamina to play this and to have this successful season, they practice all summer, and they would run. One of the players said 13 plays a minute in practice just to have the stamina to play this game because it was very fast paced, very brutal, with no real time to rest.
Yeah.
And of course, this is a time before you had modern medicine, so they didn't really have ways to recoup during the game.
You know, the reason why you and I are sitting here is really indirectly because of Diddy Siebels, who is another player on the team. I mean, I guess when you think about possibly the top player on the Sewanee team, that was Diddy Siebels. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, Diddy Siebels, his name was Henry Siebels. He was from Montgomery, and he apparently was tough as nails. He was the team captain back then. He was also the star halfback, and he was also a punter. And so he was the leader of the team, and he knew how to get his teammates fired up. One of my favorite stories that his grandson Kelly Siebels tells is that in a prior season, Siebels got the opening kickoff, ran it back for a touchdown, and was called back for a penalty. And apparently Siebels just said to his teammates, "Don't worry, we'll just do it again." They kicked it off to him again, and he ran that one for a touchdown.
These were guys that were not lacking in self-confidence, you know.
They could not be. You couldn't play this sport back then without self-confidence and a high threshold of pain.
Well, you know, the story about him playing when Sewanee played at Texas, I mean, he gets a laceration on his forehead, and he's bleeding like a stuck hog, is what they said, and they just spackle him up, you know, and then he's back out on the field.
That's
no
right.
big deal.
He didn't miss a play in the Texas game. He played the next day against Texas A&M with the spackling compound on his head. And I think Coach Suter finally made him take the Tulane game off.
He needed the rest. Yeah. All right, what about Wild Bill Claiborne? That's an interesting character.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite of the whole team. He was in seminary. And William Claiborne, he had a bad eye. So during the football game, he wore a patch over it. Mm-hmm. And apparently
now,
he was.
Tell me what a bad eye is. What is that like?
We don't really know. It was cockeyed. We don't know if he had heard it playing football or it was something else, but it was apparently very noticeable. So during the game, he wore a patch. Well, when he started a new game against a new opponent, he'd line up across the line. He'd lift the patch and say, "This happened to me in the last game. We'll see what happens today," and flip it back down and make his opponent worry about that.
And it was like a leather patch, wasn't it?
Leather patch.
Yeah, it was big and bulky, and he would he would have been interesting to line up against.
And he had one of the best lines in our film and book. He also liked to line up and grab the opposing center and pinch him to get him off his guard. And somebody asked him one time, said, "Well, do you think that's a fair tactic?" And Claiborne said, "Hell, this is no parlor game."
I love the old school terminology and all that the people used to use. What was really neat about the one of the many things that was really neat about the documentary was that you had so many legends that were commenting about this team. I mean, you had Johnny Majors, you had Nick Saban, you had Bobby Bowden, Vince Dooley, Kirk Herbstreit. I mean, did you just call those people up and say, "Hey, we want to interview you and come comment on this 1899 team," and then their ability to recall what had happened? Did they get coached up a little bit, or was it something that they just kind of knew?
Well, it's interesting. This is one of those things. I knew none of those gentlemen, so through various contacts, I would contact somebody who knew somebody, and so through that, we got in contact with each of those coaches. And interestingly, Johnny Majors' father, whose name was Shirley Majors, had been the longtime coach at Sewanee. And in fact, after 1899, the only other two undefeated teams at Sewanee were 1958 and 1963, both coached by Shirley Majors. So Johnny Majors knew a lot about the team because he grew up with it. Bobby Bowden and Vince Dooley were both students of the game and students of history. They liked the history of college football. So I didn't have to coach them up. They knew a lot about it. And then Nick Saban was kind enough to say he didn't have a lot of time for an interview, but he would do something for our film as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, I told you that you and I have got a lot of similarities, and when I saw a article online about with you and Bobby Bowden in his house, and back in like 2013, I was able to go to Bobby's house and interview him. It was an unbelievable experience. He had this little sofa that was about this big, and that's where we did the interview. And I'm literally sitting right beside this legend, and that was such a neat experience for me. But my favorite interview of all time was with Vince Dooley, and that big Georgia painting that's back behind him. And I mean, I took a picture of Coach Dooley like in that same showcase room where he's, you know, it's so just to be able to sit down with those college football legends, was that as exciting for you as probably it was for me?
It was surreal because I'd heard about these men my whole life. I had revered them. They were incredible coaches. But what I appreciated was that they were real human beings. Vince Dooley and Bobby Bowden could not have been nicer. They were really Southern gentlemen. Johnny Majors gave us all the time in the world. They were just so kind to somebody who was an unknown.
Yeah.
To let me come into their home and talk to them.
And they were, and all of them, and you know, they're all very similar. You know, obviously they're great football minds and great football coaches, but like you said, I mean, they're historians. They're great Americans. You know, and things like that. I just saw that there was a common thread between them. Did you see that same common thread?
I saw that common thread, and what I think struck me the most was the depth of character.
Yeah.
We don't always hear that today, but back then when they coached, character was key. And to see these men who had accomplished so much, and I asked Bobby Bowden, what do you want your legacy to be? He said, I've got all these trophies, I can't take them with me. I want to be known as someone who did what God wanted him to do with his life. And I was just so enthralled with that answer.
Yeah, yeah. He's more concerned about being spiritually correct than politically correct. That was a line that he gave me one time, and I thought, wow, that's a good one. Where did y'all interview Herb Street?
Herb Street, we interviewed one of my good friends, Brad Joya, was the headmaster of Montgomery Bell Academy in Nashville. And it turned out Kirk Herbstreit's sons were in school there. He had twin boys who played football and later went to Clemson. So I called my friend Brad. I said, we'd really like to interview Kirk Herbstreit. And Brad said, let me see what I can do. And he called back and said, he'll do it. And he can do it on this Saturday at Montgomery Bell Academy. So we rode up and interviewed Kirk in Montgomery Bell Academy's buildings.
What was he like?
He was a prince of a person. He was so nice. You know how busy he is, but he acted like he had nothing better to do than to talk with us. He was very easygoing. You could tell what a professional he is because you didn't have to coach him up on how to answer questions. Mm-hmm. He just did it naturally, and I was in awe. I could see why he's so key to ESPN.
He does a great job. I mean, he's so articulate. He's so sharp. I've got the highest level of respect for him professionally, and I'm sure that was a neat experience as well. You know, one of the challenges for you was you just didn't have many. When you're putting this thing together, obviously you can bring in coaches and people that can comment. You know, you can do a lot of interviews, and y'all did a lot of interviews, but you didn't have that many images, you know, to go on. So how do you sort of, you know, accommodate for that?
That was one of our biggest challenges. We had 2 photographs of the actual team in 1899, and we had 2 very poor photographs of actual games. So we didn't have a lot to go on. And the first moving picture of a college football game was 1903, so we had just missed moving pictures. So I have a friend in Birmingham, Karen Fecto, who became the co-author of my book. I called her and I said, we've got to find a way to depict some of this. She said, I know the perfect guy. She put me in touch with Ernie Eldridge, an artist in Birmingham, and he painted 14 original paintings of different scenes from the season, different things that we wanted to depict, and it was marvelous. Mm-hmm. He really brought the season to life with his paintings.
And you guys had let's show them the book, and this is the. I guess would you call this a coffee table book? Is that kind of how you're branding that? So, but there's a lot of archival stuff that you put together, and you wrote this. So tell us a little bit about the book.
Right. So we did the film and came out in 2022, and it was well received. And I was talking to Karen one day, and I said, we've got all these paintings and archival material. It really needs to be preserved in a book as well. Mm-hmm. And Karen says, well, I do coffee table books. So we collaborated. And we've got a lot of things in there that no one else had found. One of my favorites, if I can find it quickly, was Kelly Siebels, the grandson of Diddy Siebels, called me up one day and said, I found a file of my grandfather's. Would you like to look at it? Well, in that file were 2 memos that his grandfather had written about the season that no one else had ever seen before. So we found stuff that no one had seen before, and that was one of the most exciting things, was to discover new things.
Now, Diddy Siebels is in the College Football Hall of Fame and the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, right?
He is. He's one of the very few, if maybe the only, no, there's one other. I think he's one of 2 Sewanee football players in the College Hall of Fame, and then he's also in the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me was just the brutality of the game back then. It was a much different game. You and I've kind of touched on that a little bit, but I'd like for you to kind of, show us some artifacts and things like that, but also talk about it was just a brutal game, and not just from a hard-hitting standpoint and injury standpoint and things like that, but you may, at one point in the stands, a gun was pulled out. So you didn't know if you might get shot, you might get stabbed. This is a different era. So talk a little bit about that.
Much different. Remember, this is 34 years after the Civil War. The South is still devastated from that war. And by 1899, those young men wanted a way to prove their manhood, and their fathers and grandfathers had fought this great war. And so football became a way to prove your manhood. It was a substitute for combat. And these guys were tough. They played both ways. They couldn't come out of the game unless they were really hurt. They had almost no protective gear. Most of the players in 1899 only wore long hair to protect their head.
Yeah, that was your padding, was that you would just grow your hair out.
A few of them had these helmets, which, as you can see, provide almost no protection. And one of my favorite things, the Morrell nose guard, some of them would put these nose guards around their head. They'd bite on this. And what I don't understand is why, if you didn't hit that, why it didn't crush your nose. But they didn't have much. They had very little padding.
Yeah, it crushed my big beak here. But a smaller nosed man would probably be safe. But and then talk about the ball was much different. There was no forward pass. It was basically like rugby almost. You would just basically hand the ball off, grit your teeth, and then just try to plow over people, right?
That's right. So the ball really developed from rugby because there was no forward passing. So you didn't need a streamlined ball. Interestingly, the quarterback was not allowed to run with the ball. All he did was call the plays and either hand off or pitch it. And like I say, you had 3 downs to make 5 yards, so it's like a short goal line situation on every down. And occasionally, you'd break through for a long run. There were also things like, it was legal back then. You could bite, you could kick, you could elbow. So it was not only the football part, but all this other stuff. That they had a thing called lunching, which is when you're in the bottom of the pile, before you got up, somebody would bite your leg. And that was called lunching. And it was really a brutal sport. Many of the guys were hurt. We talk about in the book and film, probably the most poignant story, the star fullback, Orman Simpkins, had so much injuries due to his playing football that later he had a leg amputated to try to deal with the injuries. And then when he was 42 years old, he went into the Georgetown Medical Hospital to get his other leg amputated, and he died on the operating table. So, yeah, there's a lot of glory, there's a lot of hoopla, but there was a lot of pain and sacrifice.
And you almost think, like, why would anybody want to do that? You know, why would anybody put themselves through the physical, you know, ardor of that?
Well, it goes back to the era they grew up in. Their fathers and grandfathers had fought and died in a war. Some of these players had players who had played for the North, who had fought for the North, so it wasn't just all South. And they just grew up at a time where men were men, and you had to prove your manhood, and this was the way to prove it.
You know, another thing that was interesting too, a lot of, like, they would lock arms. You know, I mean, if the line was coming at you, they'd lock arms. Then they had like a leather thing that they would hold on to on the waistband. You know, and I think during the Auburn game, the umpires had to cut that off because that was an illegal thing. But I mean, there are all these like straps and things that are that they're using as well. That was kind of an odd deal.
Yeah, and you could put straps on a running back's legs and pick them up and throw them over the line for extra yards.
Right.
And the defense, if they wanted to break up the flying wedge, they'd pick up a defender
flying
and
wedge. That was
throw
it, yeah.
him over the flying wedge to break it up.
Yeah.
So it was a
Let's
totally
just throw a
different-
person over. You know what I mean? Like,
And unfortunately, some of them landed on their necks and broke their necks.
yeah.
So it was
Well,
brutal.
people got killed.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I mean, it was not uncommon at that time for somebody to die playing football.
That's right. At the turn of the century, there were 18 or 19 deaths a year.
Yeah.
And in fact, football was about to get banned because of that. And then Teddy Roosevelt had a meeting in the White House in 1905. Said, you've got to clean up the sport. That led to an institution which later became the NCAA. It also led to adding the forward pass to the rules. So Teddy Roosevelt, in effect, saved college football.
You know, I mean, it was not just that gauntlet that Sewanee went through on that road trip. I mean, Texas A&M, Tulane, LSU, Ole Miss. It wasn't just that. I mean, they got back from the trip. The season wasn't over with. So tell us a little bit about some of the games they played after they got back. I mean, those are some of the toughest games.
That's right. Well, remember, they had already played 4 or 5 games before the road trip. They played 12 games in 6 weeks. So they had several weeks where they played 2 or 3 games. After this road trip, when you would think, gosh, they'd say, that's a great season, thank you, they had 3 more games to play, including the 2 toughest teams in the South that year, North Carolina and Auburn. So after they got back from this road trip and celebrated that, they had to go back and play 3 more.
And the North Carolina game was essentially the national championship game for all intents and purposes.
It was viewed as the Southern Championship. At that time, the Northeastern schools looked down on Southern football and didn't really recognize it, but that was called the Championship of the South, which was, and people erroneously thought that was a bowl game. It was not. That game had been scheduled all along, but by the time they went to play it, they were the 2 best teams, and so that was for the Championship of the South.
Well, and what I didn't understand about that game was that, like, didn't the umpire just call it, just say we're done? I mean, and that was it. North Carolina had a little bit of a beef, from what I remember, right?
Right. There were the last 2 games. Both of those happened. In the Auburn game, there were so many fights that broke out that it delayed the game. As you said, they went to cut off the leather handles. That delayed the game.
That took some time.
And so Auburn was really basically running over Sewanee that day. I think at the end of the game, Auburn had 383 yards to
they kind of dominated.
80-something. They had dominated.
Yeah.
And they had the ball. They were on their way to what could have been the winning score, and the referee called that for darkness after 14 minutes.
And that's understandable. But what about the North Carolina game? What gave that the right to just say we're done?
At the beginning of the game, you would meet with umpires and you'd work out the rules. One of the rules, because there were, of course, no lights back then, one of the rules was that the referee had the ability to call the game for darkness, and that was in his discretion. For reasons we've been unable to determine so far, in the North Carolina game, North Carolina had the ball and they were moving down the field, and you had a 35-minute half, but he called that one at 30 minutes, and the North Carolina fans were really upset, as you can imagine. But he called the game, so Sewanee came out with a victory.
Well, you probably know a big historian at Sewanee. We could get a guy from North Carolina fired up about this, and we can do an article on this. Don't you think?
So my good friend Mark Webb, who was the athletic director when we did this film, he got a call one time from the athletic director at Auburn who said, you know, Auburn has a losing record against Sewanee, and we want to play you again. And my friend said, no way.
Yeah. So I want to get to you in just a second. I've got you've had an interesting life, and I do want to talk about you in just a minute. But what do you feel like is kind of the overall legacy of this 1899 Sewanee team?
The overall legacy is what you can accomplish when you have determination and grit, and as Bobby Bowden said in his interview, teamwork. This is an example of a group of men who knew how to play as a team. They didn't let their egos get in the way. And so it's a testament to what you can accomplish when you really put yourselves together with one mission.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I'm thinking about it, I mean, the documentary itself is really emblematic of who you are. I mean, that's the way I view you. I mean, you know, you're like I said, you trained as a lawyer, but you're an author. You know, you've put together a documentary. You're not scared to do. I mean, to me, that's not a coincidence that you were the person that the Lord tasked to put this thing together.
Well, I was really blessed because my friend David Cruz and I were able to spend so much time together working on this. And it's one of those things, Al, if I'd known what I was getting into, I probably wouldn't have done it. If you had told me at the start this was going to take 5 or 6 years and thousands of hours, I probably would have said no thanks. But once I got into it, I was just so enthralled with the story. And to me, people have said, what's your greatest satisfaction? My greatest satisfaction is that we found these coaches, we found a bunch of descendants of the team, and we realized that if we had not done the film when we did it, the story would have been lost forever. We've already lost 2 of the descendants we interviewed who were in their mid-90s when we interviewed them. We've lost 3 of the 4 coaches. And the descendants' children don't know about the story. So we realized if we had not captured this right now, the story would have been lost.
It's a preservation piece. It's a way to honor this team. And that makes a big deal to the families.
And one of my greatest satisfactions was we discovered during our research that the team had what we might now call an athletic trainer. He was called a rub-down man. His name was Cal Burroughs. He was an African-American gentleman who lived in Sewanee. We don't know anything about him. We think there was a second one. We don't even know his name. But Cal Burroughs, he handled the equipment. On the trip, they got 2 barrels of spring water from Sewanee and carried those on the train. He had to get those barrels of water. And on the train ride in particular, these players were so injured, they'd be screaming at night. They couldn't sleep. They were in pain. And he would literally rub them down till they went back to sleep. Well, by the time he finished with one player, he had to start with another. And Cal was really the unsung hero of the team that nobody knew about. And so I nominated him for the Sewanee Sports Hall of Fame, and he got in to that. So even though he was a non-student and unknown, now his legacy's been preserved.
Yeah. Now, were you practicing law and then doing this on the side?
I was.
Wow, that is a lot of work.
It was.
Your wife must have had a lot of patience with you, shown you a lot of grace during this project.
She did. And then I retired shortly before COVID, which gave me the time and leisure to finish the script.
Yeah. So that's kind of when you did most of the interviews and things like that.
We had done a lot of the interviews, but we hadn't sat down and written a script. And COVID I just sat down and said, okay, we got to put together a script. And that's when I did that, because then I had, for my legal training, I'd taken a lot of depositions. Well, I got some court reporters transcribe all of the interviews. So it was almost like writing a legal brief. I went through all those transcriptions, picked out the best pieces, and tried to put them together in a cogent story.
And you were already a published author, right, at the time?
That's right.
Tell me about your books.
Well, in 1999, I published a book called The Soulbane Illusion, which was a follow-on to C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. And that was a lot of fun to have a book published, a lot of work. But it was one of those things I just started doing, and one thing led to another. And then I published the sequel several years later.
Did you go through a traditional publisher, or did you self-publish the books?
Those books went through a publisher, John Hunt Publishing, out of England. So that was a real thrill to have an English publisher who liked my books and picked them up.
And you're sort of a C.S. Lewis fan, right? I mean,
Very
almost.
much.
Tell me what's intriguing about him.
I think he had the unique ability to put complicated concepts in prose that you can understand. He had a brilliant way to make analogies. And so his book, Mere Christianity, and book Screwtape Letters and others were just so meaningful to me because they gave me a view of God and Christianity in ways I had never thought about. And then I had the fortune to study in Oxford at Magdalen College, which is where C.S. Lewis was a professor. So that also piqued my interest to be there where he was.
Did he pass away in like 61 or something like that?
He passed away on November 22nd, 1963, the same day that John Kennedy was assassinated.
I was going to say that there were two things that occurred on that day, and I couldn't remember, but
Yeah.
it was same day as Kennedy's assassination. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. What's your favorite book by him?
My favorite book, I guess I have to say Screwtape Letters just because it's so unique. There's nothing else like it out there. But Mere Christianity is the book that changed my life. And The Great Divorce is another one I really like. All of his books are just magnificent.
You know, I haven't read all the Screwtape Letters, but, you know, just thinking about, I mean, it's one of those things, and I don't want to get off on this, but like just spiritual warfare, you know, I mean, and he kind of brings that to light, so to speak.
That's right. And when you read Screwtape, you're sitting there reading it, and you suddenly say, how could C.S. Lewis know what was in my heart? I mean, the way he described it and talked about it, you start saying, how did he know that's me? That's how I think. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. And that he was basically an unknown professor, but when Screwtape was published, that put him on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your books. I mean, I want to know more about the plot, some of the main characters in your book. And it's a fiction, both are fiction books,
They're both
right?
fiction.
Okay.
So my main character is Cade Bryson. He's studying in England, and he stumbles upon some letters hidden away in a library, and he doesn't know anything about them. And so he takes them to an Anglican priest and says, I found these, I don't know what they mean. And that leads to a number of adventures, because my idea was, he wrote Screwtape in the early 1940s. My idea was, what would Screwtape and Wormwood have to say about our world today? So it was kind of looking at our modern world through the eyes of the devil. And for various reasons, I changed the names from Screwtape and Wormwood to Soulbane and Foulheart.
Mm-hmm. The 1899 legacy, I want to know about your legacy. You know, what do you want people to remember about you?
I want people to remember me as a great and loyal friend, a Christian who really lived the Christian life, and a father and husband who was somebody that my family loved. I'm sort of like Bobby Bowden. I'm not all that well accomplished, but I want to be remembered for who I was.
Yeah. Well, you've done some neat things in your life, you know, and like I said before we went on, I mean, you and I have got a lot of similarities. I mean, I'm a published author. I'm an Alabama Law School graduate, you know, but a lot of times I consider myself a dabbler. And so I'm asking you, just from a Christian spiritual standpoint, what have you done? I mean, and you've gotten the green light, it sounds like, from the Lord to be doing, these different things with your life. So how do you know that you're kind of staying within God's will in each of these projects that you take on? Because that's important to me. I mean, I don't want to get outside of that, and I know that I do sometimes, but counsel me a little bit on that.
Well, first is a lot of prayer. And secondly is asking, is this really something I should be spending my time on? Mm-hmm. And personally, what I found is that along the way, just when I'm getting discouraged or running out of steam, God puts someone or something in my path and says, no, keep going. So if you had told me at the beginning of the film that we would interview Bobby Bowden and Vince Dooley and Johnny Majors and Nick Saban, Kirk Herbstreit, I said, you're crazy, I don't know them. And yet all along the way, just when we were getting discouraged or running out of ideas, something like that would come, or I would talk to somebody who said, "How I can put you in touch with them." And so it was little steps. It wasn't that I saw the big vision. It was that little steps along the way kept me going.
You see the Lord's hand kind of working along the way. I mean, I've kind of felt like that too, is like, sometimes you'll be sitting there thinking like, well, I mean, am I doing what I need to be doing or whatever? And then something will inevitably happen where you kind of get an open door. And I'm not saying that every open door is the Lord, because sometimes Satan can open doors. But, it's almost that like assent to what you're doing, like, hey, let's go a little bit further. Did you feel that?
I did, but probably more importantly, I was asked to speak in my church about my books a couple of months ago. So I sat down and they said, don't just talk about the team, put a spiritual. And what that did was I went back and started looking at it, and that's when I realized how much God had done for me that I didn't see at the time, but now looking back I could see. And that was really a moving moment for me when I realized, gosh, just when I thought this door had slammed, this door opened. Just when I thought this wasn't going anywhere, this happened. Mm-hmm. And looking back on it, I could see all these things that happened that I didn't even realize at the time they were significant.
And you don't necessarily have to be like preaching every day or something like that. I mean, he can work through the everyday thing that you're doing in your life. I mean, like, when I started this magazine, about a year ago, there's times where I kind of struggle about, I'm not preaching the word or whatever in my job, but like along the way, he kind of puts you in positions with people to have gospel conversations, and he's done that for me with Talegate. And now here we are sitting talking about the Lord on a podcast, and something that I didn't anticipate ever doing. So it's just kind of neat the way he works in that way.
It is. One of my favorite quotations is St. Francis, who said, "Preach the gospel every day. If necessary, use words." Mm-hmm. I think it's how you live your life, because people can see through you if you have a lot of great words and you don't back them up.
Yeah.
So I want to say that I've lived that life, not that I've talked it.
Yeah. Now, how can people see the documentary, and then how do people stay connected to what you guys are doing?
We have a website, Sewanee, Sewanee, 1899.org. You can order books from that website. You can stream it. You can order a DVD. And I think our film is still available on PBS Passport as well. But you can definitely get it through our website.
Okay. And what's the plan moving forward? Are you going to continue to promote and continue to do book signings and things like that?
Well, because I self-published, it's been a lot harder with this book. But we've applied for a number of book awards. We've applied for over 20. We haven't heard from all of them, but I think the count right now is we've won or placed in 17 different book awards. So,
and you won a regional Emmy for this too.
We were nominated for a regional Emmy. We did not win for Best Historical Documentary. So I'm pursuing these book awards. But I'm looking for that next open door. Somebody to pick up my film, maybe Netflix or somebody like that. I'd love for a publisher to see the success of this book and come in and take it over.
Yeah.
So that's part of the unknown. That's where right now I'm in the middle wondering what's next, and I don't know what's next.
I think it's a really cool thing what you've done. I really do. I mean, again, we've done a couple documentaries, and one of them was 10 minutes, the other one was 14 minutes. I mean, you put together a 90-minute plus documentary. And how many people did y'all interview?
We interviewed over 40 people.
Okay, 40 interviews all over the South. I mean, and then having to write the script. I've got one question for you. That train that comes by, where was that footage shot?
Well, that was our video editor, Matthew Graves, who put all of this together.
Okay.
I call him a magician for how he did that.
Yeah.
So he found that footage and put it in there.
That was a really neat thing to kind of start and set the tone for everything. So I thought that was.
And I want to mention as well, when we're starting out, we're trying to figure all this out. I'd never done a film before, never studied film, didn't know what I was doing. But I happen to know that a man named Bobby Horton in Birmingham had done most of the music for Ken Burns' documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
I called Bobby out of the blue. He didn't know me. I said, listen, you don't know me. I'm thinking about working on this documentary. Would you be interested in doing the music? We had lunch, and right off the bat, he said, I'd love to help you. He gave us a music score that's just amazing.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, listen, I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate you coming to Jasper, and I just really wish you the best of success with this project. And if there's any way I can help you in the future, please let us know.
Likewise.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.